there was a sound the executioners of Paris had never heard before. It was not a scream, not a plea for mercy, not the silent trembling of someone staring into death. It was singing a clear, unwavering hymn in Latin, rising from 16 voices, walking calmly toward the guillotine as though they were stepping into a chapel instead of a courtyard drenched in blood. And with each strike of the blade, one voice fell silent. Yet the hymn continued, stronger, surer, unbroken. The crowd, accustomed to cheers, jeers, and the macabre spectacle of human life snuffed out, froze. For months, they had celebrated the guillotine. They had demanded it, watched it, marveled at its efficiency. But here, now, they faced something that made no sense. 16 cloistered women, the Carmelites of Compiègne, were walking to their deaths. Women who had not seen the outside world for decades. Women whose hands had only known prayer, whose voices had only known the quiet songs of devotion. And yet, they were about to confront the ultimate violence without fear, without hatred, without despair. Constance kissed the small statue of the Virgin hidden in the prioress's palm, pushed aside the executioner's assistants, and walked forward, singing. She was the first. She would not be the last. Over the next hour, 16 women would walk to their deaths, and Paris would hold its breath. A city addicted to blood, silenced by faith. This was not legend. It happened on July 17, 1794, at the height of the French Revolution. 10 days later, the man responsible for their deaths, Maximilien Robespierre, the architect of terror, would himself ascend the same scaffold and fall beneath the blade he had wielded so efficiently. But to understand the courage of these women, we must first understand the world that brought them to this point. By 1794, France had become a nation consumed by fear. What began as a revolution for liberty and equality had become a relentless machine of death. The promises of freedom had drowned in blood, and Maximilien Robespierre, a man obsessed with order and purity, controlled the Committee of Public Safety with absolute power. Enemies were everywhere, or so he claimed. Aristocrats hiding in attics, priests holding secret masses, citizens failing to cheer loudly enough at executions. The solution, in Robespierre's mind, was simple: death for all. Let God sort them out. Except he did not believe in God. In less than a year, the Revolutionary Tribunal sent over 17,000 people to the guillotine. In Paris, the executions became so routine that the executioners developed a deadly rhythm: load, position, drop, next. At their peak, they could execute a person every 2 minutes. One square, one scaffold, thousands of deaths. The air in Paris grew thick with fear and with blood. Cobblestones were soaked. Neighbors complained of the stench. Death was no longer shocking. It was normal. Robespierre, however, had a particular hatred for the church. He saw priests and nuns as allies of the monarchy, obstacles to reason and revolution. Churches were shuttered or repurposed. Priests forced to renounce their vows. Religious holidays abolished. Even the calendar was rewritten to erase any trace of Christianity, wherein a religious habit became a crime punishable by death. For the 16 Carmelites living in their commune at Compiègne, 50 miles from Paris, this was a death sentence waiting to be signed. In September 1792, soldiers expelled them from their home. They were forbidden to wear their habits, forbidden to live together. Yet Mother Teresa refused to scatter her sisters. She found for small apartments where they could live in secret, praying quietly, continuing their devotions away from the eyes of the revolution. Then, in an extraordinary act of faith, she gathered her sisters. "Would you be willing," she asked, "to offer your lives as a sacrifice, not seeking death, but accepting it if it comes for the sake of France?" The older sisters hesitated. The idea seemed madness, but within hours, all had returned, their fear replaced by resolve. They renewed their vow, each morning at 4. They would pray that if their deaths could bring even a flicker of peace to their country, God would accept their offering. For 2 years, they waited in silence, watching the terror consume everyone around them. Then, in June of 1794, betrayal came. Someone had spoken. Soldiers stormed the apartments before dawn, tearing through letters, prayer books, religious medals, and statues, evidence of their faith, their crime, in plain language, praying. They were imprisoned in a former convent, a cruel irony for women who had spent decades seeking sanctuary. But even behind those walls, something extraordinary occurred. While other prisoners wept, shrieked, or lost their minds, the Carmelites continued to rise at 4, singing hymns, comforting others, maintaining the discipline of their prayers. They seemed, witnesses later said, to be preparing for a wedding, not an execution. On July 12, 1794, they were transported to Paris for trial. Their civilian clothes had been washed, leaving them to travel in their now illegal habits. Hours in open carts, under the gaze of a jeering crowd, and still they sang. Hymns that echoed across the streets, over rooftops, into the hearts of those watching. The Revolutionary Tribunal, a theater of predetermined justice, offered one final choice: renounce your vows, deny your faith, swear allegiance to the Republic and live. Constance, the youngest, answered first. No. One by one, 16 times, the answer repeated, no. No compromise. No fear. No hesitation. Death was inevitable, yet they faced it with serene conviction. Sentenced, they began to sing the Te Deum, a hymn of thanksgiving, in the courtroom itself. They were thanking God for the privilege of dying for their faith. Guards froze. Prosecutors faltered. Witnesses later described the moment as surreal, almost sacred. On July 17th, the nuns were loaded into carts alongside 24 other prisoners. While others trembled or wept, they sang continuously for 3 hours, their voices piercing the heat-soaked streets of Paris. Shopkeepers paused, women leaned from windows, children pointed. A city addicted to death had never seen anything like this: calm, radiant women walking to their deaths as though it were a sacred procession. When they arrived at the guillotine, executioner Charles Henry Sanson, who had witnessed thousands of deaths, was unprepared. He allowed them one final hymn. The nuns stood, young to old, each taking their turn with the same ritual, kneeling, kissing the Virgin, walking to the scaffold alone, singing until the blade silenced them. Constance went first, then Sister Maria of the Incarnation, Sister Euphrasia. One by one, 16 voices fell silent, but the courage they displayed transformed the square. Paris, a city drunk on blood, was mute. Time seemed to stop. Even the guillotine, for all its terror, could not dominate these women. Mother Teresa, the prioress, climbed last. She had blessed each sister, watched them die, and now faced the blade alone. She sang the final verse of the Sa Regina, her voice a solitary echo across the square. Then she positioned herself beneath the guillotine. The blade fell. Silence enveloped Paris. The bodies were thrown into a mass grave, along with hundreds of others. No ceremony, no prayer, no acknowledgement. Yet something had broken in that afternoon of July 17th. Witnesses could not stop talking about it. The peace on their faces, the dignity, the courage. 10 days later, Robespierre himself was executed on the same scaffold. He did not sing. He screamed. And just like that, the reign of terror ended. Coincidence, perhaps. But for those who had watched 16 women face death with grace, something had changed. Fear had lost its absolute power. The Carmelite story did not die. English Benedictine nuns imprisoned with them remembered. Catholic authorities eventually recognized their sacrifice, beatified in 1906, canonized in December 2024. Today, the cemetery at Picpus in Paris holds their names, quietly, away from tourist maps. Every year on July 17th, a small group gathers, lighting candles, singing the same hymn Sa Regina, Veni Creator, keeping alive the memory of voices that once silenced a screaming mob. Constance, Marie, Julie, Teresa's 16 women who refused to surrender, who turned fear into devotion, who showed that the ultimate power of the human spirit lies not in survival, but in unwavering fidelity to one's conscience. In the end, perhaps that is the only victory that matters. Not survival, not revenge, but remembrance. 16 nuns sang on the way to the guillotine, and Paris, for a single afternoon, learned what courage truly sounded like. If you want, I can also create an enhanced version with cinematic pacing, detailed ambient sound cues, and emotional beats that would stretch this to 5,000 plus words for perfect YouTube narration. This would make it feel like a full-feature story. Do you want me to do that next?